We have a few open seats in the front if anybody would like to be right in the front of the action. Please feel free to move up. Good evening, everybody. I want to thank you for coming to our annual Black History Month evening program. My name is Karen Praval. I'm the Vice Chair of the Employees Committee on Diversity. I'm also an employee in the City Manager's Office. First, I want to recognize our City Council members. I'd like to recognize Councilor Simmons, Councilor Siddiqui, Councilor Zondervan, Mayor Mark McGovern. We also have Deputy City Manager Lisa Peterson, and the City Manager Louis D. Pasquale. I'm looking around to see if I forgot anybody because I don't like to do that. And we also have Sheila Kitty Rawson with us. As we look at Black History Month, we look at the theme for 2018, it's African Americans in time of war. It marks the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. It honors the roles that Black Americans have played in warfare. Throughout the month of February, and for me, throughout the entire year, as I tell my son and as I tell my family, we celebrate the achievements of African Americans throughout the entire year. We recognize the central role that Blacks have played in United history. We recognize and remember the descendants of enslaved Africans. We acknowledge and recognize a unique culture, especially of the Gullah Geechee people, which we'll learn about later today. I want to have Mayor Mark McGovern come to say a few words.
I always have to lower the mic. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Karen. It's really an honor to be here. And as Karen said, this is this year the theme of Black History Month is celebrating African Americans who fought for our country. And actually, Councilor Simmons, would you like to do an introduction of our friend who are?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's always a pleasure to acknowledge people who have done service that are in our midst. And I often say my very good friend who I'm going to introduce, Mr. Red Mitchell, we have shared birthdays. I'm October 2nd, and he's October 2nd. He's 90, I am not. Mr. Mitchell served in World War II, and please rise and let us acknowledge you, Mr. Red Mitchell. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And truly one of the nicest and most genuine people you'd have a chance to meet. Black History Month is a special time, but should not be the only time, that we reflect on the important contributions and achievement of the Black community in our nation's history. It's a time to celebrate Black excellence and Black innovation, a time to uplift Black creativity and Black art, to highlight Black history and culture, and to affirm that Black lives matter. I want to thank the City of Cambridge Employees Committee on Diversity. Muna, where are you? Let's give Muna a big round of applause. For organizing this event as a way to honor the rich tradition of storytelling in the Black community. And I want to recognize our featured speaker, Ms. Theresa Hilliard, a renowned Gullah storyteller, for joining us tonight for this special event. The custom of sharing stories and preserving culture and language through storytelling, song, dance, and music is an integral part of Black history, and we celebrate that tradition with you tonight. Thank you. So I also want to thank Michael King from the post office across the street for unveiling the Lena Horne stamp with us tonight. I think this is the first time it's being unveiled, so thank you for sharing that with us. And again, I just want to thank all of you very much for being here tonight. It's a great crowd, and it's really a testament to even folks who come from outside of Cambridge who want to come here for this event here tonight. So thank you so much, and have a great night.
Thank you, Mark, and I welcome the City Manager, Louis D. Pasquale.
I also have to lower the mic a little, but I just want to first of all welcome everybody and thank them for being here to celebrate tonight's Black History Month event. You know, the city's diversity committee was originally for employees, and they've done a phenomenal job having events for employees. But diversity in this city goes far beyond its employees. It's about what the city is. So when we have an event that really brings our employees together, and I can't recognize them all because I leave people out, but I want to thank all the employees for being here as well. But I also want to thank all the residents and the people who are here today, because this is what makes Cambridge special. It's having events like this when we can get together and talk about what's really going on in the city. So I also want to thank Councilor Simmons, who's really been a leader in terms of leading the diversity committee and making sure that we have these events, and has really been someone who's really made sure that we were heading in the right direction and doing the right thing. So I just want to recognize and thank her for that. So each year the city has been sponsoring an annual Black History Month program, and a lot of work goes into planning this event. So again, I want to just thank all the members of this committee that do these events and continue to do these events and understand the importance of what these events not only mean to our employees, but to everybody. So can the members of the committee just please stand up? That way there I don't miss anybody. And can we give them a round of applause, please? Black History Month is an important opportunity for us to remember and reflect on the significant contributions that African Americans have made throughout our American history. I am especially looking forward tonight in hearing from tonight's storyteller, Ms. Theresa Hilliard, as she talks about the Gullah Geechee people and their unique culture. It will be an interesting and educational program for all of us, and we're really looking forward to it. And I just want to again thank her for taking part in this event. We really appreciate it. And finally, the one thing that happens when you follow the mayor is often you say the same things, but I would just quickly like to thank the post office for all their support and being here tonight and just say thank you very much. So again, thank you for having me here, and we'll see you later on tonight. Thank you.
Before we unveil the stamp, I want to talk a little bit about how, as we recognize the unique culture, the culture of Gullah Geechee people, as we look at African song, music that evolved out of the conditions of slavery that characterized people's lives. It influenced the evolution of musical forms, and it can be heard in many musical genres, such as spirituals, gospel music, ragtime, and blues, and hip hop. So today, I would like to thank Michael King. He's the manager of the Postal Service in unveiling our stamp, Black History Month stamp of Lena Horne. Can I invite Louis, Mark, City Council members, Diversity Committee members, as we unveil the stamp? And Ms. Hilliard. Thank you. I just want to recognize Ellen Semenoff. She's the Assistant City Manager for Human Services who is joining us this evening. Today, we have Miss Theresa Hilliard. She's an authentic Gullah-speaking storyteller, an artist in residence, and a historian. She's been featured in the October 2014 issue of National Geographic video magazines and has been sharing her Gullah heritage most of her adult life through educational presentations and storytelling. Her artistic expressions continues to the preservation of a culture that is an integral part of South Carolina in American history. So I welcome Ms. Theresa Hilliard. Thank you so much for coming.
Wade in the water. Wade in the water, chillin'. Wade, wade in the water. God got trouble the water. Come on, God got trouble the water. I said, who that man dressed all in white? God got trouble the water. Well, now it look like one of them Israelite. God got trouble the water. Come on now, wade, wade in the water. Wade, wade in the water, chillin'. Wade, wade in the water. God got trouble the water. That's one of those songs that those old Negro spirituals was sung many times during slavery and a part of the Underground Railroad. One of those songs that was saying, we gonna wade in that water tonight because we could get away from this plantation and we'd going north. Follow the good now because we'd going north. We could get away from here. I'm so glad for being with her this evening now. I'm so glad they wait me here. But tell her now, but the Gullah Geechee people, I is one of them. And we got a few, might be here now. Because you know, during the Great Migration, they come way here from South Carolina. And they gone all of them big cities. Chicago and New York, Detroit, California, Texas, all kind of places like that. And they got their way because they want to get away from the plantation. But I'm going to tell you a little bit. Some of you may have understood that, and some of you may not have understood, but I just wanted to greet you a little bit in Gullah to let you get a flavor for the Gullah language before I tell you more about the Gullah Geechee people. My grandmother reared me out on the island of Edisto. And Edisto was is actually one of the 5 islands where the Gullah Geechee people came when they left their home of West Africa. You know, they were targeted because of their ability to grow that white gold rice. The Europeans was looking for a cash crop, and when they discovered this rice, and they knew that the West Africans had this knowledge and this ability to grow rice because they had been doing this for thousands of years already. So they didn't come to this new world happenstance. They were selected, and they came with lots and lots of skills and abilities. But the most important one was that rice. Later on, of course, it was cotton, but rice came first. So, they were taken away from the only life that they knew, and they were taken to Central Africa in groups. They came in coffles and taken to Central Africa, where they were held until the ships from Europe came to bring them to their new life. So while they were there, now we know that Africa is a large continent, and language is, everyone do not speak the same language. So whether you were in a tribe down the way or right next door, your language may have been different. You spoke different dialect, different language. Just because you were from the same area didn't mean that you spoke the same language. So then, when they were waiting, and sometimes it would take weeks for them to get on that ship, but they had already left their comfortable home, and they were in another part of Africa, and they were there waiting to come to their new life. Actually, they didn't know what was going to happen to them. They were chained, and they were shackled, and they were waiting. So they had to find a way to communicate. We have to be able to communicate with each other. So some people say that the Gullah language started on the Sea Islands, but actually it began long before the Sea Islands, because while they were awaiting their fate, they had to learn to communicate. So they picked up bits and pieces of languages and words from the different and various tribes. And they developed what was then pidgin, like a pidgin language, so that they could communicate with each other while they were waiting. And then when they got on the ships, the captors spoke English. So then they picked up words from the English language, because their language was outlawed. They were not allowed to speak their language, because then their captors felt that, well, perhaps they would be planning some type of revolt, because there were many of them and only few of the captors. So that's why they were chained and shackled. Although they were in the bows of the ship, they were afraid of any type of uprising, so they were not really allowed to speak. But then when they came to the New World, they went directly to the Sea Islands that was filled with nothing but plantations. Plantations, 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 all over. And the part that were not plantations, they made them into plantations, because you know that our African ancestors built America. It was their labor that built America. They cut the trees and dug up the stumps and made the fields and the thousands and thousands of acres of rice fields all over the plantations. So the earlier Africans who came through the West Indies, which was an English colony already. But then the Gullah Geechee people came directly from Africa, directly to the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia. Those in South Carolina were called Gullah. And that word could have come from Angola, or it could have come from the Gullah people. But we don't know exactly where it came from, but it's likely that it did come from, because a lot of the Africans that came over came from that region. So the Geechee people, when they settled in Georgia, they all settled near the Geechee River. So then they were called Geechee because of that. Some say it's because of the Geechee tribe that was near the area where they were captured before they came to the New World. So when they came to this New World, they really became a new people. But if there was anything good about it, they were able to keep a lot of their customs and their traditions and all of that, because on the Sea Islands, a lot of times they were on the plantations without any type of overseer at all. They did not have, because they were isolated on the islands, they were surrounded by rivers and creeks and the Atlantic Ocean, so they had no way of leaving. And all they knew was that they were in the bows of the ship for so long that they didn't even know how many days. And it could have been 30 to 45 days before they reached this land. So they had no idea where to go. So if they were to even try to leave, where would they go? They didn't know where to begin to go. So they were on the Sea Islands, and the plantation owners knew that they had no way of leaving. And they did not stay out there in the spring and the summer because of the mosquitoes. Nowadays, the mosquitoes not as bad. We've got all kinds of things to deter them. But back then, they needed the ocean because of the ships, because the ships came in to take all of that rice back to Europe. So the plantations were always near those rivers. Now, South Carolina and Georgia was very tropical, and it was very conducive for the growing of the rice crop. So the plantation owners, them been going for living in tongue house, and I ain't to talk what the tongue house on I got you know. They went in town. So, and Charleston was a city, and back then they call them in town. Them be living in town. And then the slave people, them be live out there on the plantation. And so then the plantation owner would leave a trusted enslaved person to run that plantation while he was having fun in town. So, and then if there were any whites out there, then it would have been maybe one person on the plantation. But the majority was nothing but African enslaved Africans. And they worked from day clean, for day clean. They're gonna work early in the morning for day clean. And they work late at night when the sun done gone down. So they worked from before sunup until after sundown. And then even after they did, that was just working for the plantation. And then after that, they had to do their chores. They had to do their cooking. They were given a little plot to plant their food. They couldn't partake of the food for the plantation. And because those food were shipped to Europe and shipped to Charleston for the plantation owners to be able to eat. Now, there were two kinds of slavery back then. It was the plantation slave and the urban slave. Now, those on the plantations could retain the Gullah traditions and everything because they had no one to interrupt them. But in Charleston, those enslaved people had direct contact with their white enslavers. So the urban enslaved people did not speak the Gullah language because they had to speak the language of their enslaver. So since they were around them all the time, then they picked up that language because the Gullah language, it has so many different African language along with the English language, and it was really, the targeted language was English all along, but they spoke it with an accent. The cat coming down the road, the cars coming down the road, the children are playing the yard, the children is playing in the yard. So they were able to keep all of that out there on the islands because they were isolated, nobody to bother them at all. But then guess what? Progress came. And you know what happened when progress started? It was the 1950s when the bridges came. And once the bridges came, who came with the bridges? The developers came with the bridges. Now that they had access to the islands, the developers came, and those property and those land out there that was once so undesirable, you know, those mosquitoes with the yellow fever and the malaria and all of that kind of stuff, after slavery ended, after the Civil War in 1865, then the enslaved people were able to purchase property. They were able to purchase property. And my great-great-grandfather was one of the black kings of Edisto Island, who was very instrumental in helping those islanders, those newly freedmen, to get property so that they could have a place that they could call their own. So they purchased property, but those property was the property that the enslavers didn't really want anymore. You know, they were near the marshes and the water and the creeks and all of that. So they were able to obtain lots and lots of land back during that time. And then when the developers came and they wanted those land back, what happened? Because our ancestors did not know how to read or write because it was unlawful for them to read or write. They couldn't read, they couldn't write. So since it was unlawful for them to do that, they did not know anything about writing a will or putting anything in writing to say that this property goes to my family. So then, thus the heirs property. You all have heard about the heirs property. So if you go on the islands, you would see all the families all clustered together because they all built houses or got trailers or whatever on these heirs property. So now laws were passed that's supposed to keep the property from, you know, we had lots of hurricanes and things like that. So the laws that was supposedly put in place to save these homes were the same laws that caused a lot of them to lose their property. Because the taxes went up, a lot of them could not afford to pay the taxes on the home because, of course, they had low-paying jobs, and they could not pay the taxes on the home. So then, a lot of the properties went up on the auction block. The developers were able to purchase them very, very cheaply. So when these land that was once undesirable now became very, very important. So the condominiums went up and all the developers, and people say, well, they took the land. Some of them, when they wanted the land because it was heirs' property, and because of the Great Migration, a lot of the children of those Gullah Geechee people moved away. So developers hunted them down, and the property, they were forced to sell properties. Because if just one individual that was a part of that plot of land, and they could have been as many as 100 by that time, from the 1800s till the 1900s, everybody were owners of that land. The children, like our land, my great-grandmother bought the property, and then it was my grandmother, her children, and then me and my children, and it just goes on and on and on. So if the developer wanted the property, they would find that one heir, and that heir would force the sale because they would offer them lots, what they felt was lots of money at the time, because we were still in the low-paying jobs. So then when they were offered these money, then if one person wanted to sell, then they had to sell the property. And I don't know if you all followed the news back in the early, like in the 1990s, when in South Carolina, a lot of the property was lost. And it was, national news because of those property, and people who had lived on that property all their lives had to leave and they had to find someplace else to go because developers sort of forced them out of the property. But now I was reared out there. Of course, we say raised. We don't say that proper word reared. I was raised by my Gullah grandmother, and it was not a picnic growing up on the island. Pump water, outdoor toilet, and a lot of times you had to compete with animals in there. And what you ate was whatever, you heard of the soup of the day? It was whatever my grandmother went out there and caught that day. She said, "Why don't you forget supper now?" Wasn't dinner, it was breakfast and supper. So I'd go and forget supper now. I'd go and forget supper. So she'd get her croaker sack, throw it across her shoulder, get her shotgun, and she would go out there and get supper for the night. And supper could be coon, raccoon, possum, opossum, skull, squirrel, bud, bird, whatever she caught. That's what we ate that night. And we didn't know any better. There weren't any stores out there. There was one little store, but that store didn't have anything. And even if it did, we didn't have any money to buy anything anywhere. I wore a lot of flour sack clothes because the flour, you didn't throw any scraps away at all. It was made into a quilt, always made into clothing for you to wear. So flour sack, you got one Brogan shoes for the year. You all probably don't know what that is, but it's a tough leather shoes, and it with the laced up around your ankle, and you got that, and you couldn't kill it. You just outgrew it because your feet got bigger. And then sometimes, if you couldn't get another one, what happened? You cut the toe. So you'd be walking around there with your toe hanging all the way over until you could get another shoes. Now, back in those days, the grandparents was raising the children because my mother generation, they moved north for better opportunities. So they left the grandchildren home with the grandmother. So the only language she spoke was Gullah. So she taught us what she knew. She knew Gullah, but it was eventually beaten out of us because our parents, the generation just before mine, knew that we were going to have to leave that island one day and we needed to learn correct English. So my mother, although she be living in tongue, when she come out there on the island now, he said, look here now, you can't talk that Gullah. You cannot talk that Gullah. So when she would come out on the island, I would have to speak correct English because she was my first teacher in teaching me correct English. My grandmother was first because she taught me Gullah, and then my mother taught me English. And then when we started school, then the schools, our teachers by that time had gone away to the HBCU, the Historical Black College and Universities, and learned correct English and brought it back. So when my mother would come to visit, and I would say something in Gullah, then I'd get a pop. And it's like, no, no, no. So I would go in and out of it. It's like I would speak Gullah with my grandmother. Are you going out in the yard for play now? I'm going out in the yard to play now. You know, I want to go down the road. I'm going down the road now. My friend them down there. I'm going down the road. My friends and those are down there. And my mother would come and she would say, how are you? You better speak correct. And I says, I'm going down the road. My friends are down there. But then when she was gone, my grandmother, my friend down the road, I was going down there. So that's how, and then as each generation come along, more and more of the Gullah is disappearing. And my generation is actually the last generation to have direct contact with Gullah-speaking people. And if we don't pass it on, my generation, then it will die. And we will not have access to this Gullah anymore at all. So I want to tell you all a few little things my grandmothers would say. She would say things like, "He clean gone." Now what does that mean? It means that he left a long time ago. And he said, no, what's that at? That means, where is it? And now I up here, to crack my teeth to Hannah, and Hannah down there, and Hannah need to crack your teeth all. I'm up here talking. I done unravel my mouth now. But Hannah ain't saying nothing at all. So Hannah need to crack your teeth. That you're not cracking your teeth, you're not saying anything. And I'm up here unraveling my mouth, talking all the time. But now Hannah got your ears open, innit? Huh? Hannah got your ears open? Yeah, to shut out your ears. And you got two of them, you know. And my grandma would tell me all the time, he said, look here now, you can't do too much of talking because you got two ears and one mouth. So that means you for listen twice as much as you to talk. Don't unravel your mouth too much then now. You ain't got nothing for saying now. Sometimes you have to shut your mouth, you know. And if a man really like a woman, you know, they would say, oh, you all tie up there. Oh, God, you see you all tie up there now? That means that he was fascinated by this woman. So his eyes, you know, was just on this woman, you know. And she might say something like, he tiny head, you know, he tiny head. That means he changed your mind. Say, yeah, say him and tell me something there. What him ain't gonna do? Then he come back there, no, and he done turn his head. Told me that he was gonna do something, and he came back and turned his head. Meaning he changed his mind. Change your mind. Now, he says, he gone no for greasy mouth, you know. Yeah, say he been out there, need that tree there, that lay down. And now I ain't sure him again, because he done gone for greasy mouth. He was under the tree laying down. But then I missed him. So he gone for greasy mouth. That means he went to eat. Now, so if you're worrying, she would say things like, make it a worry so. Make it a worry so. It's like, why are you worrying so much? You don't have nothing to worry about. So you worrying for nothing. I ain't no way to worry for. I ain't no way to, you ain't got nothing to worry about at all. And he said, no, you know, you always got somebody that steals. So my grandmother would say, now, he hand short a patient. Yeah, he hand short a patient, you know. And that means that it was stealing, you know. It was stealing. And she said, your hand short a patient. Now, she would say things like, oh, God, don't worry about that one day, because they done for. They done for, that means that person ain't no more good at all. He ain't no more good. You know, he done for. He's finished. No more, nothing to him. And they were able to maintain a lot of their medicine because, you know, they didn't have access to a doctor out there on the islands. They didn't have no doctors to take care of them. If they were ill, they had to take care of themselves. So, you know, you hear people talk about root doctor and all of that. That was just a person who knew what root to go out there and get and bring it back to, and I'm telling you, those medicines, they knew exactly what to get. I remember one day, I was a little girl, and I said, oh, you know, my stomach hurt me, so I can't go to school today. I didn't want to go to school. I said, I don't want to go to school today. We would call our grandmother Mama, and we call our mother by their names back in those days. So I said, Mama, my stomach hurting. I can't go to school today. My stomach hurting. So she says, well, okay, gal, just lay in the bed there now. Don't get up tall now. You stay in the bed, and I don't go out you. I could be back in a minute. Don't worry. You stay in the bed. I'm going out here, and I'll be back in a minute. I didn't know what all that meant. Well, she came back in the house and put that pot on the fire and started boiling something. I says, I feel better now. I'm ready to go to school. She said, no, school don't start now. You ain't not going to school again. I could give you that medicine because you must have got worm. I said, no, you're not going to school. Says, school already started, so you got worm. And my stomach was hurting, but I didn't want that medicine. But so she would tell me to drink the medicine, and every time I would drink it, I would spew it back out. I would just spew it back out because it was bitter and it tasted so nasty, you know? So my grandma said, hold your head back. She held my nose, and when I said, she threw it down my throat. And that's the key, to get that nose closed. And once she did that, I had that medicine, and before the others came home, I was running around feeling just fine. So they knew all the things to do. And I'll give you a little bit of the remedies that they use. You know that moss? I don't know if you all know what the white moss that's on the oak tree. Well, that moss was for if your head was swinging. You know, they would just take that moss and wrap it around your head, and the next thing you know, you were steady on your feet. You were steady on your feet. Now, if you had an ear ache, guess what they did for that? She would smoke that pipe and blow that smoke in your ears. And that would cure that earache. Now, what about spider web? You know those beautiful webs that spiders weave out there? Those spider webs, you put it over the eye, and then the children, they say, won't see spirits. Because, you know, back in those days, kids were seeing spirits all the time. You know, it might have been influenced by what we were taught as well. You know, we were taught about the hags and all that kind of stuff. So we would, when we heard that a person from the neighborhood was a hag, then we would put a broom across the doorway. And they says if that person walk across that broom, that person's not a hag. But if they didn't, then that was a hag. And this lady would come over and say, come here, gal, move that broom from that door there so I can come in the house. And we would say, oh, no, we knew that she was one. And let me tell you how imagination is. When that lady, they says, oh, the hag would just fly away on the broom and all kinds of things, and your little mind would just imagine she would walk down the road, and of course she's going to disappear at some point. Well, our little mind says, I saw her when she got on the broom, and she just flew away. There was no such thing. But then, hey, that's what I thought. That's what I thought I saw. Now, if you had a fever, you know, these big lily leaves, I don't know whether you have them here, but she would put it all over your body, and then tie a cloth around your body, and you would go and just lie down. And within an hour or two, those leaves would be crumbling, and your fever was gone. We had lots of splinter in our feet back in those days for walking barefooted because, you know, you couldn't wear your good shoes around the house. That shoes was for going to school, and of course you could wear it in the woods. But so you played in the yard barefooted, so we got lots and lots of splinter. So she would get a penny and some salted pork, and you place it in the area where that splinter was, and when you move it, it drew that splinter right out of your feet. So those are just some of those traditions that they brought from Africa with them, and some of the medicine that they used when they were out there on the islands to try to help themselves. Now, the Gullah people were a very, very unique people. We still have some of them on the sea islands of Johns Island, James Island, Edisto Island, Young's Island, and Wadmalaw Island. So if you come to Charleston and you go out on those sea islands, although they're many generations removed, because a lot of them still stayed on the islands, because when the developers came and built the developments out there, then those ancestors who were able to retain some of the land and live and continue to live on it, then they work for these developers out there in a service capacity. So because they did not come to the city that much, so a lot of them still retain some of those African language, and some of them still speak the Gullah language today. Now, Africans, if you notice, they always cover their heads all the time. So my grandmother, wherever she went, she always covered her head. They always wore an apron everywhere they go. They had wore an apron. They always cover their heads. And we were taught, you never. Now, Bukra is the African term for white people. So she said, now you can't look the Bukra in the eye now. You have to look down when you talk to the Bukra them. She says you cannot look the Bukra, the white person, in their eye. So when she would talk to them, she would be looking down all the time. She would be talking, but she had to look down because it was a disrespect to look a white person in the eyes. You just could not do that. And so these are the kinds of things that she taught us as children. Now, my grandmother, they called her Mama Dunk. So if you, that was a term of endearment, because you could not use Miss or Mrs. or anything like that. You couldn't put a handle on the name of a black person. So, because you could not do that, and if the whites were fond of you for whatever reason, they would call you Annie, auntie, like auntie, or mama, you know, like my grandmother, Mama Dunk. And the smallest white child, you had to put a handle on her name. You had to say Miss, you know, Miss Susie, you know, Miss whomever. But then the smallest white child could address a black person by just their name. Like they might say dunk to my grandmother. We used a lot of pet names, we called it back then. So they would put no handle on her name at all, other than the very few who would call her Annie or would call her Mama. Other than that, you don't put a handle on any names at all. So those were the kinds of things when we grew up, my generation, then we wanted people to use our proper name because we didn't want to use those pet names that we were given, and we wanted people to give us a handle. And people would say, "Don't call me gal," because that was a term that was used during slavery, boy. And I'll tell you this little story that my mother told me in Charleston. This white man came to town, right? He come in town. So now there was this black man that was walking on the sidewalk. You know, he was walking on the sidewalk, whistling, taking his time, doing whatever. So the white man say, "Hey, boy, so you live around here?" So the black man say, "Yes, I live around here." They said, "Well, good, because I was trying to find a battery. I'm trying to find a battery." So the black man said, "Battery? I ain't know nothing about no battery." So he said, "Oh, okay then. Say, you know where the custom house is?" The black man said, "Custom house? I ain't know nothing about no custom house. What a custom house?" He said, "Well, you know where the post office at?" The black man said, "I can't read and I can't write, so I ain't got no news for no post office. I ain't know nothing about no post office at all." So he says, "Well, do you know where the courthouse is?" He said, "Now look here now, I ain't never been in no jail. I ain't had no use for no court. So I ain't been in no court. I ain't know nothing about no courthouse at all." So the white man said, "You say you live around here?" He said, "Yeah, I live around here." He said, "Well, for a person who live around here, you sure don't know nothing." The black man looked at him and said, "Well, I know one thing for sure." The white man said, "What that?" He said, "I know I ain't lost." So he left the bucket at a scratchy head to wonder how for getting out to the battery and the post office and things like that there. And the man gone about the business and he left him right there. Now, I'm going to end with a little song. I think it's about my time. I got time for that? Oh, okay. All right. I like to share the, songs, these old Negro spirituals that was sung back in the day. And this one was like after, or just before slavery ended. They sang a lot in the fields. They had work songs that they worked by for synchronization. And then they were songs that when they worship, because that was one of the things that, now in the urban setting, they could not worship because only 2 blacks could assemble together without a white man in the presence. But out there on the plantation, none of those rules applied out there. So they could worship and they would sing and they would do the ring shout. And they did all of these customs and everything, and they were absolutely just could do just whatever they wanted to do. So, and it was a lot of pain, and suffering. So, and when they were singing, a lot of times the pain and suffering, it made it a little bit easier. So this one goes like this. Soon I will be done without the troubles of the world, Lord, the troubles of this world, Lord, the troubles of this world. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, going home to live with God. Well, I said no more weeping and wailing. I said no more weeping and wailing, Lord, no more weeping and wailing, going home to live with God. Soon I will be done with the troubles of this world, Lord, 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 the troubles of this world, Lord, the trouble of this whole world. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, going home to live with God. And now I will entertain questions. Okay. I will entertain some questions if you all have some questions that I can answer. I might not be able to answer them all, but I will give it my best shot.
Thank you. That was amazing. I'm from Suriname in South America originally, and we have a Creole language called Sranang. And I was struck that some of the way you were speaking is very similar to some of the Caribbean islands, but even some of the words you were using also occur in my language, in particular the word bakra, which in our language also means white man. So I was curious if you knew the origin of that word.
I do not know the origin of that other than it's an African word for white people, but I don't know like what part of Africa that word is, because there are like over 1,000 languages there. And that Gullah started out as a pidgin language, and then it evolved into a creolized English after they came to the new word, because then they started incorporating the English language because their captors were English. So it was just so many different words in that Gullah language that it just became a language of its own, after a while. So it started, like I said, over there when they were thrown together, this diverse group of people. And then as they came to the New World, they had to continue to be able to communicate with each other. So they took some words from all the different languages along with the English, because that was the targeted language, because their language was really not allowed to be used. So they had to be a quick study to learn how to, speak English. Yes, yes. Well, yeah,
Oh, could you explain a little bit about the ring shout?
well, the ring shout, they were like dancers. I mean, they really, really loved to dance, and that was a part of their spirituality. They would have like a big stick and pound the stick as they go, and then they would just go around and around, and you see some of that in Black churches right now, today. When people, they say they got the Holy Ghost or whatever the case is, or they would dance around the church. That's a part of like a spiritual dance that they would do along with the stick as they were singing, and then that stick would have some rhythmic moves to it, and they would just go around in a circle and just dance. And it originated, we think, with someplace in the western part of Africa, and other parts may have used it as well. But they do it a lot in the Sea Islands, so that's why we think that it was definitely done over in the western part of Africa, and that was one of the things that they brought here with them. And a part of it was, speaking in what they call tongues. They would be saying words in their language as they're doing, this shout. And nowadays you would hear people say, this person is speaking in tongues. But that was one of the things that they did. They were praising God the way that they do it. That was one of the things that they were able to retain on the islands, where those who went into the urban areas could not do that, because they were not allowed to do that. They weren't allowed to gather more than two at a time, anyway, without a white person in the presence.
Good evening. My name is Gabriel. I don't have a question. I just want to say that just to confirm I'm West Africa. I'm from the Ivory Coast. Okay. So everything you said is really similar to what I've lived. Okay. One thing you said about respecting, not being able to look at the people when you talk to them. Here when you guys were sent, you were not able to talk to the master, which was the white person. Right. But back home, it's about the elderly, people who are older than you. Mm-hmm. You can look in the face. Okay. And I pretty much can't even look at my bosses here. When I talk to my bosses, I can look at them. Okay. I just look around. But here in the culture, it's like you're lying if you don't look at the faces. Uh-huh. You know what I'm saying? But in my culture, I can't, because when you're superior to me, I have a difficulty looking at you, staring at you. So that's just to confirm what you just said, as West African, pretty much. And we have things in common. I'm chubby, you are chubby. Maybe that's what we are. So we're sporty, we run a lot. So things like that, we have that in common. The main thing that you said that is true, I won't go any further.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
If you want to put your hand up, I'll come around with the microphone.
Thank you.
I just had a quick question. You said, you mentioned a number of islands. You said Johns, Young, Edisto, and what were the other ones where Gullah people still live in? James. Malo. Okay, thanks. I know you had one. Sorry.
You just saying the spiritual soon I will be done, and I just looked it up and it said it was written by William Dawson, so I'm wondering how it made its way into the Gullah culture, or I know that there's been some speak recently about Kumbaya originated from the Gullah culture, so I'm just wondering about Soon I Will Be Done, what the perspective is of where that spiritual came from and how it came.
Well, a lot of the spirituals went after the Civil War. Then a lot of them made their way into the newer culture. We had those who had had some education with the songs that we sang. We didn't have words, you know, since no one knew how to read and write, they didn't write any of those things down. So later on, they were researchers that researched, went out and talked to people on the islands and so forth, and then they went and put lyrics and music and you know, kind of wrote them at what do you call it? Copyright. Yeah, they did that to a lot of the songs, but to a lot of those songs. So that one, although I don't know the exact origin of it, I do know that it is considered one of the Negro spiritual. Yeah, because I have like a book with, with old Negro spiritual, and because all of the earlier ones, they just sang them. I mean, they didn't have any music, I was gonna say. They didn't have music to them. But then, later on as they got educated, music was put to a lot of the songs. So I don't know the origin of all of them in this book that I have of Negro spiritual, because I wanted to know the songs that were sang back in those days, and I like that one in particular. So I wish I could tell you exactly where it came from, but I do not know. Well, yes, they had a lot of makeshift instruments. Now, when I was little, my grandmother and her friends, they used to get a utensil like a spoon or whatever and the washboard, and they would make music. They would make music with that. They would turn the tubs upside down and get a stick or something and make music on the tub, and they would make these some little wooden things. I can't quite remember all the names of them. These little wooden things, and they would have just the best time. And even the cowbells, our cows had these bells on them to be able to find them. And they would take the cowbells and knock on it and make music. So they made their own instruments to complement their singing. Those were like the old earlier primitive instruments, makeshift instruments before they were able to, purchase other instruments in the 1900s.
All right.
Yeah, so they had all kind of noise makers.
Hello.
There.
Switching gears a little bit. My grandmother, who's from the West Indies, swore she could cure anything. So I'm wondering if you kept any of your medicinal traditions, because for instance, if we had fever and we were with my grandmother, she would have one of my brothers, pardon, she would have them kind of urinate on you, and then the fever would break for some reason. It worked. So all sorts of things that she would do with us. And
a lot of those things, I personally do not know. My grandmother, I was just a little girl, so when she would go out there and dig up these roots and do different, and make different kinds of medicine, she would stir up stuff and put it on you and all kinds of things. But we didn't take note of that kind of stuff back there. So I don't remember, and I would ask some of my older cousins, about things that they remember since they were older. But I don't know. I do know that back in the olden days, they did talk a lot about voodoo, and the voodoo people, and they would go. The voodoo was mainly in a place called Beaufort, South Carolina, and people would travel. Says we going to Beaufort to the voodoo man, and I mean, I don't know exactly what that means, but that meant that he knew different remedies, natural remedies that he could use to cure you. But then it also turned into an evil thing as well, where people would say he put root on me, he put voodoo on me. To say something happened that they didn't like for instance, somebody took somebody's husband or something, they say, I go into Beaufort and let them put a room on him to get my husband back. So, and if she got him back, that might have been a coincidence or something like that. But then she would give the voodoo man the credit for getting her husband back. So, yeah, I don't know. It kind of, for our family, it really died with my grandmother, so to speak, because as we migrated from the island, then a lot of the stuff that they had access to was no longer available. And as development started on the island, a lot of the medicine and things that were available to us then were lost with the development of the island. Because when I was a kid, we had every fruit that you could think of. You know, the pear tree, the fig tree, the plum tree. I mean, every kind of grapes you could think of. You had vegetation, you know, vegetable stuff. You had all kinds, I mean, nuts, so many different kinds of nuts. I go out there now and I says, wonder whatever happened to that big old tree that we used to go and play under and eat all those nuts and all that. You don't see any, there are no plums out there anymore, no kind of chickapee trees, no acorn trees, none of the things that was available to me growing up. We always had a stomach full because there was always something out there that you could go and eat. There was fruits, nuts, or something. Mm-hmm. All of those things have disappeared with the development.
And then I have a musical request, if you're taking any. Rock of My Soul in the Bosom of Abraham.
Oh my goodness, I have not sung that song in ages, so I'm not able to honor that request. We sang it as a kid because my grandmother, you know, in the Baptist church, they sang all of those songs, and I do remember that one. I mean, I remember singing it as a child, but I haven't sung it since then. So I'm so sorry that I'm unable to honor that request. That is in my old Negro spiritual book, but I haven't sung it.
Good evening, Theresa. Hi.
Oh, hello.
So I know that you probably had a lot of rice to eat, but were you able to retrieve some of your other cuisine from, you know, Africa?
Well, they really sort of developed more of a Gullah cuisine after they came to the islands, because a lot of the food that they had in Africa may not have been available here in the colony in the United States at the time. But actually, I am writing a cookbook right now about those foods that I remember eating as a child, which is really, and some of them are no longer available. But we do cook the Gullah food, and the Gullah food really came about because the food, everything that the plantation owner threw away, we ate. You know, with the pig, we ate from the rooter to the tutor. So they ate high on the hog, and we ate low on the hog. So everything that they threw out in the trash that they didn't want, our ancestor knew how to make a meal out of it, because they were not allowed to eat the food of the plantation owner. So they were only given, you know, once a week they were given like some corn to make mush, so they only had meat when they were able to go out there and when they were able to go out and hunt and get, you know, and the raccoons and the squirrels and things like that, because they were not able to eat the food from the plantation. So that's why we eat, you know, chitlin and pig feet and all of those things are what we call Gullah cuisine. The chicken neck that was thrown away, the chicken head, the chicken feet. You know, those are all the things that my grandmother prepared. Chicken feet and the neck and the back. They didn't like the back, so everything, all of those food is what they made a meal out of, because that was the only thing they had. So they had to eat the things that were thrown away. So those are the things that we eat that we call the Gullah food today because, but then of course they brought those things that were available to them on the plantations, you know, like potatoes, you know, the yams and the okras and all the prelos and stuff. They brought all of that, all of those food with them. You know, the knowledge of how to make those things with them. So whenever they had ingredients for food from their from their African roots, then they made them. But others, they made based on the availability of what was in the colony for them to eat. And they would make a good meal. That's why with this cookbook that I'm preparing, there are no real measurements. You know, it's a pinch of this and a dash of that, because they prepared food by taste. Taste only. They didn't measure, you know, 3 cups of this and 2 teaspoons of that and a half a teaspoon of this and all. They didn't do any of that. They would put a dash in, taste it. I think I need a little bit more. Put another dash in, yeah, that's it. And trial and error, and the next time, okay, I put 2 dash in there, and it was too salty the last time, so I'm gonna put a dash and a half in it this time. And it was passed down orally, you know? So you had it in your head. It was not written because they didn't know how to read and write. So everything that they passed down, it came from oral. That's why you hear people say, so you got to get this oral tradition, oral history, oral history from them and from the ancestors, because there was nothing written at the time.
Hello, Ms. Hilliard.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that fascinating history lesson. I have a question. I get splinter still. So could you repeat the remedy with the penny?
Well, girl, you look here now, you have to go out there and find some butts meat. You have to go out there and find, you know, this meat. I don't know if you all have it here in Cambridge and Boston. It was just it was called butts meat back in the days. It was, nowadays it's bacon, it's this little thin thing, bacon, but that fat, nothing but the white part. Nothing but the white part. And she would tie it on our feet. And when we took that off, that splinter was laying on its side, had been drawn out of that, yes, out of there. So I don't know if it worked today, but it sure worked back then, because I'm a witness. Yes.
Any other hands?
As a pigeon developed, were there code words that you could use when you needed to communicate, when you didn't want any white people to know what you were saying?
Oh, many. Well, actually, that's what the Gullah was really all about, because they had lots and lots, and Wade in the Water, that song was one of them, to say that tonight, this is what we're going to do. So it was a lot of messages and songs. There were lots of words, messages and words that they used, that they had determined that this is going to be the word for this. And when you hear this word, or when you hear this sound, you know, like not S-O-N-G songs, well, that too, but if you hear a sound, like they would imitate birds and animals and all of that, and then they says, when you hear this, like like a night owl or something like that, they might imitate some kind of animal or something like that to say, when you hear that, then come on out, because that's, we're going to be leaving. So they used a lot of that so that the, whites would not be able to understand. But a lot of them were in songs. Because see, when they were singing, they were working hard and singing. So then the overseer, the white man wasn't paying attention. He just knew that they were singing. In the beginning, they were not allowed to sing. But then they found out that they worked harder and quicker if they sang. So then they allowed them to sing. So then this way they were able to throw messages in those songs. And the white person did not know what they were planning.
I know some indigenous groups have language reclamation projects, and so I wonder if the Gullah folks are working to like maintain or preserve. I know that there's a group on Martha's Vineyard that has reintroduced like Wampanoag language into the school so that the kids, so it sort of comes up with another generation. Is there any work to do that, to preserve the language?
There is no formal work that I am aware of. Now, I do go to the schools and I teach it to the children as an artist in resident. I go out there and teach it to them, but not enough people are doing it. And I write down everything for my children so that when I'm gone, they'll know what I'm talking about. Write down the history and stuff, how I grew up, you know, out there on Edisto, and the things, you know, the things that I grew up with. And this cookbook is kind of mainly for them so that they'll know those things that I ate growing up. And my mother was a cook on one of the plantation from a little girl, like age 14. So a lot of the foods that she prepared and brought home would be in that, you know, in that book as well. So it's, you know, it started out as just a project so that my family will have the knowledge and perhaps, you know, there'll be other people that are interested in a little bit of the past as well. But no, they're not doing anything that I know of to really preserve that. And it's, you know, it's really sad because I'm only one person, and you know, I do my small part.
I just wanted to echo some of what some of the other people here said. My family's also from the islands, from the St. Thomas, United States Virgin Islands. And it's interesting that I was able to understand what you were saying when you were speaking in Gullah. And, you know, my grandparents speak a similar language. And also they seem to have a cure for everything with a bush. So. Yeah, and I've also drank bitters, thanks to my grandmother, so I was able to relate to that. But I was just curious about, with the Gullah people, whether the families were preserved, like whether marriages were allowed, or I know that that your people were isolated, so I was just curious about whether within that structure the families were preserved.
Well, no, you know, it was, they were not, the Gullah people were not considered humans. If you remember, we were chattel, it was chattel slavery. We were property. So property can't marry each other. You know, so there were no sense of family or anything like that. When Charleston was the most important city in the United States during that time, because 40% of the enslaved people came right through Charleston, South Carolina. 40% of them. The other percentage came through Louisiana and Savannah. But they were, when they went on the auction block, it didn't matter, I mean, it didn't matter whether they had a baby. The baby could be snatched out of their arm and sold to somebody as a pet for one of the plantation owner children. You know, today we would have an animal or something as a pet. But back then they would have a little kid, you know, as a pet. So I want to buy this baby here for, you know, for my daughter, to grow up with my daughter. And that baby would grow up in the house, in the plantation home. And that child would grow up as the pet for one of the, you know, for the children. So each one of their children, plantation owner children, would have, you know, a child that would be their pet, that would be their pet. So during the late 1800s, domestic slavery caused a lot of families to separate because, and when I say family, those who did have maybe a relative, if they went to one of the village and, take a lot of people from that particular village, when they came to the United States, they didn't necessarily stay together. Because some out of that village may have gone to Johns Island, some may have gone to James, some may have gone to Guatemala. So it didn't have anything to do with, let me keep the families together. No, it was like, I want this one and this one and this one and that one. So the slave plantation owners would go out there and just bid on the people, and they were sold to the highest bidder. And it was based on their decision as to who they want. So it didn't have anything to do with family. They were not able to preserve family until after the Civil War. Before that, they didn't even have names. I mean, we cannot trace our ancestry before the Civil War and ended at all. We can only trace it after the war ended when we actually got names. Because before that, it was Bobby, Bubba, whatever. So we don't know. So there were no sense of family or anything like that. There was no such thing as family or anything like that. Later on, they, began to marry, but it wasn't like a legal marriage. The plantation owner could say, okay, y'all can be husband and wife. And the man met, but then if somebody came by and says, I want to buy that boy there, then he would be gone, and that wife would no longer have a husband. So no, there were no sense of family or anything at all. Family didn't matter.
We have time for one last question. A lady here, and then we're going to conclude.
Thank you, Ms. Hilliard. Two matters. I wonder if when people followed the Gullah diet on the island, were they healthier than after they had migrated? And secondly, there is a fabulous film called Daughters of the Dust. Maybe some of you have seen it. It's about 25 years old, and it was re-released last year and shown at the Brattle, and I recommend if you have access to it, see it. Thank you.
It should be on Netflix. Oh, my goodness, the first part of the question was diet. Were they healthier before? No. Matter of fact, their lives, they had short lives, because they worked very hard. They did not have the proper nourishment, and they did not have proper clothing in the winter. They didn't have, clothes to keep them warm or anything. They weren't, they weren't looked upon as humans, so there were nobody there to say, well, they've got to have warm clothes. They got shoes once a year, and if that shoes was gone, no matter whether it was winter or whatever, you walked barefooted. Sometimes they would wrap their feet, with cloth if they could find something to try to keep it warm. So no, their diet was just throwaway food. I mean, food that wasn't even enough for them to go out in the fields and really work hard. They just did not. And they were fed in troughs. I don't know if you know what that is, where pigs, fed in trough. The food, this mush, was cooked together and just put in a trough. And they would take oyster shells as their utensil, and just, they would just dip and eat and dip and eat, and sometimes that food would be muddy by the time everybody had sort of eaten it. So no, they had very short lives, very unhealthy diet.
Ms. Hilliard, I want to thank you so much for coming. If we could give her another applause. It's great that we are able to have the opportunity to have. It's great that we are able to have the opportunity to have someone such as Ms. Hilliard come to talk about her culture and her history and her story, and I'm really thankful that you're able to come.
I'm so grateful that you all invited me, and I want to thank Muna for this invitation and the mayor and everyone who was responsible for me coming here today. It was a distinct pleasure to be here. I'm so fortunate that I had the opportunity to come here, so I feel very blessed to be in your presence today, and I thank you all for this wonderful, wonderful opportunity.
Well, on behalf of the committee members, I thank you all for coming. I would like to extend a special appreciation to the city manager and the mayor for their support of this program. Thank you and have a good evening.